There are three men who might explain why this had to be done. Defense Minister Moshe Dayan died in 1981. General Uzi Narkis was commander of the troops in the region. Yitzhak Rabin was the Army Chief of Staff. He maintains to this day there were commandos in the villages. We asked the man who went on to be Prime Minister why the villages were destroyed.
It was through the fighting with the purpose to eliminate any possibility to these commando battalions, the Egyptian commando battalions, to hide themselves. There were few days in which we were in a search of these two Egyptian commandos, and to prevent them to have any place to hide themselves, we decided to get rid of whatever could serve them as an hiding place.
Who gave the order to demolish these villages?
I gave the order.
It was your order?
Yeah.
Mr. Rabin, the people in those villages were civilians. Does the fact that their side was the aggressor, in your view, provide that the Israeli army should be allowed to go in and demolish their homes, demolish their belongings, and send them packing?
When the fighting started, practically there were almost no civilians there. Their places were taken by Jordanian and Egyptian soldiers.
Forgive me, Mr. Rabin, but one of your own, in fact two soldiers who were there, who were eyewitnesses to this, say that indeed what they found when they searched the homes of these people were villagers. They corroborated each other's experience by saying they did find one wounded Egyptian commando, but that these three villages were full of civilians who were not taking an active part in the war. These are two Israeli soldiers.
To the best of my knowledge, most of them ran away. Might be that after a few days they returned.
The Geneva Convention, to which Israel is a signatory, clearly states that this kind of action is illegal. Articles 53 and 49 state that the destruction of civilian property and the transfer of civilians is illegal.
Allow me to remind you that at war there are certain rules of war, and whenever we are at war, we will do whatever is needed to protect Israel, to defend Israel's population.
General Uzi Narkis tells a different story. He was commander of the troops in the region, and he blames bloodshed in the War of Independence in 1948 for what happened. The road beneath the hills of Latroun that runs between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem was blocked by the Arab Legion. The Israelis fought long and gruesome battles there, and they lost. Today, the rusted remnants of Israeli convoys remain by the side of the road in memorial to their dead. The land on which the villages sat represents a painful memory for the military, a memory that provoked retribution, according to General Narkis.
I think that it was an operation based on the difficult souvenirs of 48. It can look as if it were a sort of a revenge. I think that a strict order was never given.
When we talked to Mr. Rabin about it, he told me that he gave an order and that it went through official channels for this to be done.
To destroy the villages?
Yes.
In my opinion, it was a local operation.
But the suggestion that it was a renegade action by the troops on the ground is contradicted by soldier Amos Keenan's testimony.
The children cried. Some of our soldiers started crying too. We also handed out cigarettes and candy. More soldiers burst into tears. The platoon commander decided to go to headquarters and find out if there were any orders about what to do with them. He returned saying that there were no orders in writing, simply that they were to be driven out.
In fact, Keenan complained to General Narkis about what was happening at Latroun.
I asked an officer to see what was going on, but until he got to the place, I think that all the Arabs were already out of the villages, and later on the houses were destroyed.
Did you investigate who might have given that order then if it was done at a lower level than yourself? Was an investigation ever done of why this happened?
No, I did not.
Yitzhak Rabin says this land was cleared for strategic reasons. His central commander, Uzi Narkis, says it was a renegade action. But others believe Defense Minister Dayan had reasons of his own. Yuri Avneri believes he wanted to straighten the border.
What Dayan wanted to do is to eradicate the Arab villages in this area so that when he claims, so that he would claim, let's say, a border rectification in this area, there would be no Arab villages or no Arab people there, which could be used as an argument for not letting Israel have this area. This was what it was all about.
But Israel has refused to leave the West Bank land it occupied in 1967. The United Nations says it occupies it illegally, and Canada takes the same position. So a park that bears Canada's name on that land does not sit comfortably with Canadian foreign policy. Yet despite the sign and the names of the Canadian contributors sitting squarely in occupied territory, the Jewish National Fund maintains that government policy has not been contravened. No Canadian money was spent here, they say. That money all went into another part of the park, which they claim is within Israel's pre-1967 border.
We simply would not do anything which was not consistent with Canadian foreign policy.
Yoin Goldstein was a fundraiser for the Canada Park project.
There was no money that we spent during that time, or indeed during any other time, which was used, at least to the best of our knowledge, beyond the 1967 borders.
The Canadian JNF may believe that none of its money was spent in occupied territory, but it is hard to see how it could be avoided, because Canada Park, according to every map we could find, appears to be entirely within occupied territory. This National Geographic map of the Holy Land includes the Green Line. It clearly puts Canada Park beyond the Green Line in occupied territory. This Israeli government map, which bears a JNF logo, puts the park in the same place. The same place as this map from the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency, and clearly in occupied territory. We asked Benny Mushkin if all the cartographers had got it wrong.
I don't know where they got this information. I really don't.
Are you saying, sir, that they're wrong?
Yes.
This is not Canada Park?
No, not this only is Canada Park. Canada Park is much beyond this area.
I just want to be clear about this because I'm confused. Are you saying to me that this area that says Canada Park,
right,
where the contributors' names are,
yes,
where the signs by the road say 1 kilometer to Canada Park,
right,
no Canadian money was spent here?
That is correct.
What evidence can you produce for us that no Canadian money was used in this part of the park?
I should prove to you that I did not invest money in this park.
Well, you would think, this being such a sensitive issue, that the JNF might keep some files to show precisely where the money was spent.
We do have the files. JNF money is not being spent in areas beyond the Green Line, except in areas where there's in Jerusalem, which is also part of it, where it goes the Green Line.
Can we see those files that show that?
Which files?
Yeah, the files that you said that show that no Canadian money was spent here.
The file will show you that will tell you that Mr. So-and-so's contribution was invested in Canada Park. I can tell you that money was not invested directly in this area.
But you have no breakdown.
Do we have a breakdown, Avi? No, we don't have a breakdown.
If no money was spent here in occupied territory, we wondered about this sign, which clearly states that the Tannenbaums of Toronto had paid for the recreation area where we were sitting. I just want to be clear about this, that we're sitting beside the Joey and Faye Tannenbaum recreation area, but they didn't pay for it?
No, they paid for recreation in Canada Park, but not this particular one.
So this isn't it, even though the sign says we're sitting at the Tannenbaum, this is not it?
That is right.
It's somewhere else?
That is right.
Could you take us to where it is?
Avi, would you have a map to show us? Yeah, probably would, yes.
The JNF officials never did take us to the Tannenbaum recreation areas that aren't in occupied territory. Joseph and Faye Tannenbaum are elderly, and their son Wayne spoke for the family in Toronto.
I can't tell you specifically. I know we paid for certain recreational areas, but when you pinpoint a map, as you know, we're dealing with thousands of acres of land, or as they call them, dunams of land.
This sign says the Valley of the Springs, developed through the generosity of Joseph and Faye Tannenbaum, Toronto, Ontario, Canada.
Mm-hmm.
What does that say to you about who paid for that?
Sounds real and specific, yeah.
Sounds like what?
Sounds like they paid for it.
The other Canadians whose names are displayed in the park likely donated money without ever knowing where it would be spent. But even if they weren't told and didn't know, they were being put in the middle of a bitter dispute.
I think it's a very stupid idea on the part of those Canadian people who helped calling this park Canada Park. It's no business of any Canadian to intervene in a disputed issue. The land of Palestine, Eretz Israel, is disputed between two people, and let us not call any park Canada or Japan before peace is settled.
If there is ever to be peace here, many believe Israel will have to trade land for it. The hatred each side holds for the other is as deeply rooted in Canada Park as anywhere in the Middle East. For the Palestinians, the land the park sits on represents their birthright. For the Israelis, the security of their nation.
I don't see any Israeli leader that will give it up.
Why?
Why? Because we need it for Israel's security, to maintain the line, the road between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem totally secure, as you wouldn't allow that the road between Toronto and Ottawa will be controlled by a potential enemy of Canada.
The minimal requirements for the Palestinians is to have the right to self-determination in their own land and create their own independent state and their own entity. And secondly, to have the right to return to their birthplace and their homeland if they so choose. This must be fundamentally obtained. Because if this is not obtained, there will be no peace in the Middle East, and I can assure you, no peace can last without justice.
There is no peace today in this village in the West Bank. Israeli soldiers order Palestinian boys to remove pro-PLO graffiti. The hatred is passed like poison from generation to generation. In the graveyard, the tombstone of a teenager shot for his activities in the Intifada. 24 years ago, his parents walked to this village from Imwas. A few blocks away, another family whose children fight their parents' battles. These boys grew up yearning to return to a demolished village they'd never seen. One of them is in jail for life for murdering a so-called collaborator. Down the street, a mother picks fruit for her youngest while her oldest awaits sentencing. In this house, too, the children were raised on stories of a return to a village long disappeared. This boy, just 16, was found guilty of murder, a murder committed for his parents' cause.
We are prepared to sacrifice everything to our last drop of blood to achieve freedom.
Even if your boy is the one who's paying?
Even if I have to sacrifice the last child, my youngest Hakim, we will do it in order to have our country back.
To close his report, Amos Keenan made a prophecy about the future of the people who had lived on the land now known as Canada Park.
The children who went crying on the road will be Fedayeen in 19 years, in the next round. Thus we have lost the victory.
Started, practically there were almost no civilians there. Their places were taken by Jordanian and Egyptian soldiers.
Forgive me, Mr. Rabin, but one of your own, in fact two soldiers who were there, who were eyewitnesses to this, say that indeed what they found when they searched the homes of these people were villagers. They corroborated each other's experience by saying they did find one. There are three men who might explain why this had to be done. Defense Minister Moshe Dayan died in 1981. General Uzi Narkis was commander of the troops in the region. Yitzhak Rabin was the Army Chief of Staff. He maintains to this day there were commandos in the villages. We asked the man who went on to be Prime Minister why the villages were destroyed.
It was through the fighting with the purpose to eliminate
wounded Egyptian commando, but that these three villages were full of civilians who were not taking an active part in the war. These are two Israeli soldiers.
To the best of my knowledge, most of them ran away. Might be that after a few days they returned.
The Geneva Convention, to which Israel is a signatory, clearly states that this kind of action is illegal. Articles 53 and 49 state that the who gave the order to demolish these villages?
I gave the order.
It was your order?
Yeah.
Mr. Rabin, the people in those villages were civilians. Does the fact that their side was the aggressor, in your view, provide that the Israeli army should be allowed to go in and demolish their homes, demolish their belongings, and send them packing?
Fighting any possibility to these commando battalions, the Egyptian commando battalions, to hide themselves. There were a few days in which we were in a search of these two Egyptian commandos, and to prevent them to have any place to hide themselves, we decided to get rid of whatever could serve them as a hiding place.